Hey guys, and welcome to class. Thank you guys for logging in today. Like all you've been doing every single day. I want to let you guys know that I miss having you guys in class, and I can't wait till all this craziness kind of ends and that we can get back to school and learning together inside the classroom. Just want to let you guys also know that I got done reading your responses to that questionnaire I sent out on Google Classroom. If you remember, we learned about plot the other day, and I asked you guys specifically what are things in plot when we're doing literature reviews that we need to help us better understand what it is that we're reading. And one of the main things that you guys identified was identifying the narrative point of view in the story, or who is telling us the story is what most of you guys said. And that is narrative point of view. So based off that feedback, I've decided that today that's what we're going to be covering. So your goal for today, your objective, will be that once class is over, I want you guys to be able to go to Newsela, which is the same reading site we use for many of our other reading activities here in class. And I want you to be able to identify the narrative point of view in short story literature and more nonfiction literature like articles or science articles and things of that nature. So again, thank you guys for being here. Make sure you guys tuck yourself away somewhere in your home where you're not going to be disturbed by your parents or your siblings or any other outside source. So you have about 30 minutes or so just to focus in on our class today. Okay? All right, let's go over to the lesson. All right, so to kick our lesson off, we'll go into our learning objective today in a little bit more detail than what I previously just talked about. So your exact goal is today you'll be able to identify the narrative point of view in fiction and nonfiction literature when reading articles and stories from Newsela. Okay, so at the end of class, again, I'll give you the directions for what your assignment will be, but more or less you'll be taking the information that you gained today from today's lesson and you will be applying it by identifying the points of view in different pieces of literature that you'll be selecting yourself in newsela.com. So the first narrative point of view we're going to be going over is one of the more common ones that we see in fictional literature, and this is first-person narration. A narrator in a first-person narration is more often than not going to be the protagonist or the main character in our story, and we as readers will be able to identify this first-person narration by the pronouns that are being used outside of character dialogue. Whenever we're looking at pronouns, we always have to look outside of the character dialogue to identify what the narrative point of view is. And in the case of first-person narrative point of view, the pronouns that the narrator will use is I, me, my, we, and us. And when we look at those types of pronouns, we can see that they are all including the person saying it. When I say I'm going to the movies, I'm talking about myself. When I say we are going to the park, I'm including me in a group. Okay, that's how we can identify that that first-person narrator is including themselves in the story, because they are saying that they are part of the story. And as a good illustration, we have here the protagonist, which is the character with a big eyeball head, is looking at other characters to show that they are sharing with us what they see and feel. The next narrative point of view we'll be going over is second person. Now, second-person narration is more tricky than our first and second person or third person because we don't use it and we don't see it as often. When we think about literature, you, me, most people, we think about these novels that we read in class, or we even think about news articles we might read, or even textbooks for classes. That's typically what comes to mind. What we don't think about is like personal writing. For example, directions. If I'm writing directions on how to do something or things that you should be doing, I'm talking directly to you as a person. So when second person narration is used, that narrator is actually talking directly to the reader. That could be us, that could be somebody else, but it's whoever is reading whatever they are writing. This is most likely used when giving directions, and it can be used in things like advertising and sometimes opinion-based articles as well. To identify when a narrator is writing in second person, the pronouns they're going to use are you and your, because they are talking directly to you. Okay, and as the illustration we see here, again,
the narrator with the large eye head is looking directly at you, the reader. The next point of view we'll talk about is third-person narration. Now, the big difference between third-person narration and first and second-person narration is that there's actually 3 different types of third-person narration. The first one we're going to be going over is third-person objective. Now, when we're first identifying third-person narration, we identify it by, again, the pronouns that the narrator is using. Now, if a narrator is using first-person pronouns or second-person pronouns, that is automatically going to tell us that that narration is being done in either first or second person. But if those pronouns are absent and we're seeing third-person pronouns like he, she, they, and them, that is going to tell us that it is third person. Now, the big thing about third person is the narrator is not a character in the story. They are not directly taking part in the story. They're just sharing a story with us. When we talked about first person, that narrator was a character directly involved in the story. So they were sharing with us things that they thought and saw, and they were telling us what was happening to them. With third person narration, it's almost like somebody's watching that main character and sharing with us what that main character is doing. When we look at third-person objective narration, this narrator has no idea what other characters in the story are thinking and feeling. They can only share with us what they can see and hear. Okay? This is why third-person objective is used a lot for things like news stories, because news reporters aren't directly involved in what's happening. So what they do is they interview people, and we can see and hear the things that the journalist is able to share with us. That's called a secondary source. All right. Whereas the person who is sharing that information on a news article might be a first-person source and would be talking through first-person narration. It's also important to note that third-person objective is very rarely ever used for fictional literature. It's typically third-person limited and omniscient, which we'll be going over here next, that will be used for that. The final 2 narrative point of views that we need to go over are third-person limited and omniscient. Next to first-person narration, third-person limited and omniscient are the 2 of the 3 major narrations we typically see in fictional literature. Right? Third-person limited is just, it's very much like a third-person objective narrator, only this time the narrator can tell what essentially the protagonist is thinking and feeling, in a lot of the same ways like the first-person narrator is able to. But the difference between third-person limited and a first-person narrator is that third-person limited narrator is not a character in the story. He is not the main character. Even though he can kind of more or less read the main character's mind and share with us what that main character is thinking and feeling, he's not actually taking part in the story. He's just sharing with us that information. Now, the difference between limited and omniscient is that a limited narrator is limited to one character, typically the protagonist. The third-person omniscient narrator is not limited to just one character. A third-person omniscient narrator can share with us the thoughts and feelings of 2 or more characters. So maybe they obviously know what the main character is thinking and feeling, but they might know what the antagonist is thinking and feeling. They might know what some of the main side characters are thinking and feeling. Or maybe it jumps between chapters. Maybe in this chapter it's the protagonist, and in this chapter it's the antagonist. But in any case, he can always share with us what they're thinking and feeling, as opposed to kind of having to just rely on the visual and audio that we typically normally see. And as you can see with the illustrations here at the bottom, with our limited narrator on the left, that third-person narrator is outside of our main characters, but he's only limited to essentially one of those characters there in terms of what they're thinking and feeling. Whereas our omniscient character, he's up above everybody else, looking down. He kind of has free range in his knowledge of what the emotions and thoughts are of all these characters.
All right, and that's it for today's lesson, guys. I'd like you to take a moment and go back to our module where you found today's link to the video. And then there I have 2 links for newsala.com. One's going to take you to their short story section, and the other one's going to take you to the news article section. In both of those, I'd like you to select 2 articles of your own. So 2 short stories and 2 news articles. You'll have a Word document on Google Classroom where you'll be able to type in the title of the story, the lexile of the story, and in there I'd like you to be able to identify in the appropriate section what the narrative point of view was to the literature that you read. Okay, so you should be able to read each short story and tell me what type of narrator was used in that story, whether it's first person, third person limited, third person omniscient, and you should be able to read the news articles and tell me, is that second person, is it third person objective, is it third person omniscient, is it first person? I'd like you to be able to identify those for me. When we come back to class, what I will do tomorrow, we'll have like a little discussion in our Google Meets class that we'll be doing, and you guys will have an opportunity to share what stories you read, what articles you read, and how you were able to identify the narrative point of views and all those. And then at the end of class tomorrow, we will have an assessment to better gauge how much you guys know about this topic. So that is it for today. I hope you guys all have a great day. Remember, if you have any questions for me, go ahead and send me an email, and we can even set up time to meet one-on-one in Google Meets or Google Hangouts to help you guys with your assignments. All right, miss you guys. Bye.